So welcome everyone to the Adult Children in Recovery podcast. This is my first podcast. My name is Vandana Tara Ora, and I'm the founder and creatrix of Vandana Light Healing. And I'm super excited for my guests to be sitting with me in conversation so we can kind of inspire you and empower you to move from that stagnant state of insanity, mental, emotional, physical, to serenity now. I was going to say prosperity, serenity, a higher frequency, all of those words that end with C-Y. But yeah, this is really great. I'm very excited and honored to be with you today. You are my first guest on my first podcast. So always wanted to have my own podcast. I've been a guest on so many other virtual retreats. I love that name. Global telesummits used to be like radio shows back in the day. Mm-hmm. Also Blog Talk Radio was like a big one. And then I had my own show. I did my own interviews, but this feels right. This feels like it's kind of like divine timing, because there's so much going on in this timeline, isn't there, Zach?
Oh, absolutely. I'm really grateful to be here, and empaths stepping into their power and leadership. It's like increasing in frequency. We can all feel it, even those of us who are like, oh, leadership, me, ew. Like we can all feel our bodies revving up to live in this fresh reality, this higher frequency reality coming in for all of us, and it's intense. It's intense.
Yeah, it definitely has the velocity, the speed and the velocity of where it feels like everything is just magnifying and accelerating faster, faster, faster. And it's like we are ascending and we are right in the thick of it, where there's no turning back. But yet there's so many parts of our physicality and sort of carbon-based cells that still feel stuck and haven't caught up. And so I think that creates a lot of inner turmoil and chaos where it feels like exhausting, confusing, and you could name any other adjectives you could think of, especially for empaths. And I know that I guess I'm going to introduce you now because I didn't before. I don't like really reading a scripted bio, and I know you. I've been on your show. So Zach he's just such a dear soul. He's so beloved to so many. And he has this really awesome virtual retreat called the Sovereign Empath. And what I know about Zach is, after being on his show too, and just like really tapping into these really lovely energies that I always feel really lit up and excited and hopeful and enthusiastic when I'm after connecting with you. So I wanted to bring you on the show just to share some inspiration and maybe just talk about your own little background, whatever you feel comfortable with about your own journey as a highly sensitive, psychic, intuitive, creative, compassionate empath. And the show really is about the connection between childhood trauma and how it kind of transforms us as children into adult empaths. Because we kind of had to get really good at reading body language and when one of our parents or family members, caregivers were about to like have a moment and maybe explode all over us, and when we had like get out of that war zone, but we had to really get good at reading those signs along the way before it maybe became a threat to us. And so that's one of the main reasons why energy sensitive people or highly sensitive people like us become the way we are, which is a gift. It's not a curse. And yet we really need to kind of walk on that tightrope sort of, just like navigate what's going on, but not in a hypervigilant way, right? So that we could really, what do I want to say? So we could feel safe, because often we didn't feel safe growing up because of the, whatever the, our parents who were also adult children, also wounded empaths that kind of never dealt with, their pain, loss, shame, grief, all of that, and how they pass it on to us, and how we don't have to do that. We don't have to carry their burdens, that we have the right to unburden ourselves and not pass it on to our children. So I think that's important to know. What do you think?
Oh, I think everything you said is super resonant. So hi guys, I'm Zachary Michael, and I'm a conscious creation teacher. I help empaths connect back to their bodies so they can consciously create their own unique leadership for the new earth. And everything you said is so relevant. And I took some notes. I asked myself last night, what are some things I want to talk about? And everything you said about this idea of shifting resonance from within us. A lot of times when as children, we're taught how to respond to energy based off of nonverbal feedback. So a lot of us have nervous systems that are basically programmed to subconsciously enforce community without us even knowing it, even when the community isn't healthy. So part of my history was that I was born into a cult when I was a child, and my family and I were there for 8 years, and it was incredibly abusive on many levels. And I actually ended up getting sexually abused there by the leader there. And most of my journey of healing since we left when I was 8 up until I'm 30 now. So it's been this kind of evolving healing from narcissistic abuse in the context of the cult, the Christian church, and also in my family, because my family was also very indoctrinated into the narcissistic paradigm that the cult was mirroring. And one of the things that came up really strong on the spiritual end for me was this reality that as empaths healing and reclaiming who we are in our innocence as children, is we really need to reclaim ourselves from the communities that we were raised in. And I know for me, especially from healing from the cult abuse, is really respecting how often I would subconsciously feed the lunacy of my story, very subconsciously. Because as empaths, we're conditioned to believe our sensitivity is a weakness, that we are deserving of punishment, and that we're also responsible for other people's emotions. And we're also taught to believe that empathy isn't a superpower. So in the fallen structure that we're used to in our matrix, this idea that our empathy isn't rewarded, for being expressed, but and here's the block here. The subconscious block is that our empathy, when we're not in sovereignty with it, actually does feed structures, communities, and belief systems that don't have the energy to exist on their own. So I know for me and my story with my family, we're going through a lot of healing, and I'm getting really emotional talking about it, is and I'm so glad you said that our families are wounded empaths. When we have narcissistic abuse, they're wounded empaths, because we're all empathic. We all have empathic consistencies at different frequencies. So if you're someone on this podcast, you're probably a higher frequency empathic being than the average collective.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, they have to be open, at least. The right people are finding this call, this podcast. So please continue. And thank you for your brave heart.
Oh, thank you, Chris.
For your courage to tell your story. I really appreciate your vulnerability.
I received that. It's funny because narcissism is like really interesting because it's basically an expression of extremely low sensitivity for self. So when someone has a narcissistic tendencies, they're basically building from a very logical, artificial place that's not really present in the here and now. And like I was saying before, like we're taking our presence back from the matrix, we have to really understand that as highly empathic beings, the people in our lives that are highly narcissistic, they use us subconsciously as like these batteries to get energy from. And because narcissism is very subconscious, right? The abuse, this is going to sound really triggering, so bear with me. Most abuse that narcissists induce on other people, it's mostly subconscious. Even like the most malicious narcissist you've ever met, most of the abuse that they're participating in their environment, they have no idea how painful it really is. So as empaths, when we take ownership and we reclaim our energy from the community that we're in, we actually create this open space of, it's like a force field, like the force field of love. When you are I am, anything that's not of that frequency, it gets pulled out basically. And it creates this huge opening of clear space for narcissists, especially narcissistic people, to really see a more clear reflection of themselves and what they're actually looking at. And for a lot of us who are really enmeshed in narcissistic abuse as empaths, like that's like really hard to do. And I'm noticing a lot of people, even in like the spiritual community, like, you know, with other teachers and leaders, like people having to really practice being in their own field and clarifying that. The next step was this idea of like, our fear of having the courage to lead with, you know, what we're noticing as empaths, because a lot of empaths have a hard time stepping into their superpower because emotion by itself, it's wild. You know, there's a wilderness to acting on your reality for what it is and consciously creating with that. And a lot of empaths we subconsciously want to have proof we're safe to be intuitive before we take the leap, without realizing that we're the ones consciously creating the safety we're looking for. And that's a trap. That can trap you in this idea that, well, I'm not going to be wild with my ability to be consciously creative if I don't have proof that it's safe. Because really, on some level, there's always going to be a risk to be intuitive and consciously creative. And one thing that came through really strong for me in my channel right now is this idea that we need to be willing to look wild a little bit. You know, for some, and the word crazy popped up, yet specifically the word wild, untamed, maybe even rebellious, this idea of like being okay with letting your beauty and your power and your sovereignty look even like a villain. Maybe to someone's world, you might look like a villain, but really that's not the truth, but that's what they're perceiving. Allowing people to have their perceptions of your reality of that. And because, I mean, how often as empaths and people in recovery from like, abuse like this, how often we feel villainized by people that, you know, find our empathy and awareness very inconvenient. It's like allowing people to think that you're crazy or insane while you step into your power. It's kind of part of the gig. And, you know, just as many people that are going to feel really threatened by your power, there's going to be so many more who are going to be so grateful that you took that leap and you showed up for yourself. And it's that risk of like honoring the risk. It's always going to be a little bit risky. And the last piece that was really, really big for me was recognizing false leadership. You know, as empaths, we often, here comes a trigger, guys. We often will subconsciously feed into false leadership just for a sense of community, you know, and this is something we're all healing. We're all healing this, whether it's family, church, you know, politics. Like there's so many spaces where false leadership gets kind of subconsciously fed just because we're afraid of being alone. And the shame I'm feeling in my body as I claim that, I'm with you. I affirm that. It's important we feel that shame. And also to recognize as we're moving into this next octave of frequency in the collective, that it's more important that as highly sensitive empaths, like you recognize when false leadership is in the space and you don't feed it. And we do this by emancipating ourselves from traditions that have really never truly worked for us to begin with. And we really recognize in our consciousness that it's, first of all, leadership is built off of a false place, a narcissistic place. Because sometimes even like not feeding the matrix isn't like being on a soapbox going, aliens are real and the government's lying to us, and this is abusive, and like all this stuff. It's like sometimes it could be very subtle first. Sometimes it could be about really recognizing, oh, wait a minute, that's not aligned, and going, taking your attention, not beating it. And then if you have to, sometimes there are going to be times where you got to speak truth to power, right? Yet recognizing that we can always begin that beginning process by doing it in our consciousness first, and then building that space that when we reclaim our power, we start to build our field, our cyclical aura. It starts to strengthen, and we have a lot more room to experience paradise. And one of the energies that came up today as I was feeling into it was the energy of relaxing. When we can trust the paradise of our own sovereignty, and we can really feel into that, there's this trust that we can return to again and again. And this idea that when we're in the process of being adults in recovery and reclaiming our innocence, really what builds, and no one's ever told me this either, what really builds that sovereign power is realizing the innocence of who you were as a child, that you always are. That sovereign power that cannot be taken from you is that child. Like the hijacking of childhood innocence is one of the most insidious programs in the fallen matrix, because your innocence as a child, I'm getting so emotional. Your innocence as
It's
a child.
okay, feel it. You don't have to, like, you don't have to hold back on this show, not with me. And you are supported, you are held by the loving arms of the universe and beyond that. And that's what I wanted to say. It's like we tend to stuff, children who were, live through unthinkable trauma, like ongoing, which is known as complex PTSD. We tend to stuff our feelings and emotions. And the only way to really recover from that is to like gently and safely release whatever it is, like just notice where they're in our body, where we feel it, identify that, but not hide it. Because we're so entrained to just hide and numb ourselves out. And there are all these frozen parts of us, these wounded, frozen parts of us that we've exiled. We've actually like jailed and imprisoned them. And we don't allow our inner children to come out. And those are the most creative parts of us. Those are the parts of us that have the most light, that embody the most light, and that can express, that have the ability to share our gifts. So you getting emotional is just so healthy and so refreshing. Because most of us have become, unfortunately, the more loss, grief, and trauma that we've experienced growing up, we've become frozen and numb, and we tend to stuff our feelings by, any kind of addiction that you can name: food, drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling, or risky behaviors. So I'm really glad that you feel safe enough in this space that you can just be yourself. Be your true self, and like you said, become an actualized self-led leader. Like your true self is taking over and all the false selves are just integrating. So you can be yourself. You have permission. I give you full permission to be yourself. And everyone who's tuning in to this podcast, and myself too, without feeling like, without monitoring with the sort of the role of our inner critic and, those parts that watch us and want to make sure, like our managers and firefighters, like to put out the fire just in case there's a threat. We don't have to do that. We could just say, okay, I see you, inner critic. I see you're really my protector. And I'm just going to ask you to trust me on this one, and just maybe step aside, give me some space to handle this. I want you to start trusting me, so you don't have to monitor me or find fault with me, but actually help me and maybe become an ally instead of a critic. So that's what we're working on. We're working on integration, not like fighting with our inner demons, but feeding them, like feeding all the parts of us that we've repressed. So please continue, because what you're saying is so important.
Thank you. Yeah, because those childhood parts are the most powerful parts of us. Like, and it's so funny because it's one of the most insidious like parts of like abuse, when childhood is like demonized and villainized. And this idea that like one of my biggest traumas in my story with my family and the narcissistic abuse was this idea that innocence can be taken away. Innocence is conditional. Innocence is, it's not something that was ever inherent to who you were. Like this idea that I know in like my cult abuse with my family, this idea that we're inherently flawed was a huge, like, we're sinful. Even like not just flawed, we were like worthy of punishment and to be hated was a huge thing. And growing up as a highly sensitive empath with a lot of joy and a lot of innocence, that was something that was preyed upon by a lot of people in pain who didn't have connection to their inner child. And it reminds me, and it's coming up in the channel, childhood abuse, this idea of the hijacking of children and the farming of childhood innocence is really from this deep, deep, deep primal disconnection from your own sense of who you really are. And going through my unpacking of sexual abuse at the hands of this cult leader was so powerful, because so much of the abuse that he didn't really understand it. And nothing he did was okay. Yet it was this idea that I was even in the situation to begin with because I was playing with dolls as a kid. I was a queer child. I'm a gay man. And I expressed myself however I wanted to. It was very non-traditional. And I was very frowned upon for those behaviors, those freedoms of expression, those non-linear ways of wanting to put things together and stuff. And the only reason why I was even alone with this man was because I was being punished for playing with Barbies. And as an adult man going through the abuse in different layers, I realized that there was an attraction to me because of that innocence. There was a preying upon me because of this idea that there was an innocence to me that this person didn't feel like they had. And almost like the sexual abuse was this very subconscious, dark way of trying to get the innocence from me, which they didn't. They didn't. But it was this way of trying so hard to get back in touch with themselves that, was kind of the precipitator to that. And obviously there were other layers. And I'm not going to assume what was going on.
So many layers.
He was really sick. I know he was really sick. God bless him. Yet I understood. I was like, oh, because even in realizing that my innocence was the main point there, I was able to, as an adult, claim my inner child and say, wait a minute, my innocence didn't go anywhere. He didn't take it from me. I could go back to that experience of watching it happen and go, wait a minute, like I didn't do anything wrong. It wasn't my fault. I get to release that man's energy. It wasn't mine.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't mine. And also to be in a place of clarity where I could process the reality of what happened on my young body and how it like vibrationally impacted me through time, and to be able to be in a place of authentic power with it. Because, for a long time, and it's natural, we're trying to understand, because childhood abusing children, there is a very low frequency. It's insane. Like, it doesn't make any sense. So we're trying to understand why someone would do something like that, right? And part of that process is in the 3D as we're evolving, is like we villainize people. We go, oh, I was a victim and this person was a villain, which it serves a purpose to help us make sense of the extreme trauma we went through. Yet as we peel back the emotional layers and we feel through it, we start to realize that, oh God, this is much more complex. It was simple, but the application was more complex. Like narcissistic abuse is so complex because people that get wrapped up in it, we do feed it. And part of the healing is recognizing the part we play in these really, really difficult worlds that narcissists live in. And how God bless them, the whole part of narcissism that's tricky is they don't consciously realize it. So we often think of evil as being very intentional. And I'm not saying that evil cannot be malicious and intentional and whatever. I'm just saying that when we're talking about people, especially like souls who are in a narcissistic template that they don't really realize they're in, is complex, and they can't validate to you. Because with empathy, we naturally want to validate each other, right? We naturally want to come to a place of coherence, heart resonance. We want to come to a place of integrity. With narcissism, because they never really leave that world, that four-dimensional mental world, they never really
they're
reach
frozen
a place
too. They're frozen, and they're living in a different timeline. They were probably victimized and abused themselves, and this is, by them acting out, it was totally, of course, unconscious, but the reason why the adult authority figures in our lives as children, the ones that we encountered anyway, not all adults are scary, but the reason why is because it's just unprocessed trauma that gets passed on from generation to generation. But of course, as children, we didn't know that, and we couldn't process that, so we blamed ourselves, right? And that created a lot of pain and shame that we still carry as adults in our system. So it's a question of it's a daily practice of not grieving the loss of our childhood alone, but sitting together like we are in community, and the process of talking, trusting, and feeling, which we're doing right now. And that is that comes right before the steps of healing, like moving from hurting to healing to helping others. So you're doing well. In my perspective, just sitting on the other side of the Zoom universe, it feels like just by willing to talk about what happened to you gives other people permission, so many other souls permission, because this is unfortunately far too common, this situation in our world. So please continue. I hope that was helpful to whoever's listening.
Absolutely. And just to be compassionate, like that self-blame that we start developing as children, it's really an attempt to make sense of like the craziest stuff that we go through. Like, I just want to speak with compassion, like, the abuse on children, especially, like, it is insane. Like, these frequencies are extremely low. They're not coherent. They don't make sense. And as children, we're just trying to get a sense of reality, because it's like on a fundamental level, it's so inorganic that we're trying to keep ourselves, safe. It's the beginning of trying to understand safety, right? So it's like, if no one's willing to take responsibility,
or have a sense of stability or security, and that's because early on we form insecure attachments to our first caregivers, who were supposed to be there, like, to take care of us and provide for us and give us food and shelter and unconditional love and support. And many of us didn't have that. And so I belong to a nonprofit organization called ACA, which stands for Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families. And in this group, one of the things that blew my mind, they have this big red book, and it's a 12-step program, and it's a process of unburdening, right? But it's also very empowering, and it's like being reborn again. And what they say, and please listen to this, because it blew my mind when I heard it, but what we've experienced is a process, and it does take time, and recovery from trauma is not like a one and done. It's multi-layered, and it can take, it's different for everyone. But what they say is, we've experienced in our first 18 years 72 seasons and 6,572 days of childhood pain and shame. 6,570 days of childhood pain and shame as a result of being raised in dysfunctional homes, like I said, where we often had to walk on eggshells and learn to read minds. And like you said, nonverbal cues. So how does that sit with you? Like, that's a fact. Like, that's the thing. We have to learn how to differentiate fact from feeling. We have to learn, like, okay, this was my feeling, but is that really true? What were the facts? And I tend to misinterpret a lot myself in relationships because of my deep feelings. What do you say about that?
Well, it's tricky because as empaths, this might sound a little controversial to some people, yet we do have telepathic ability. So the difficult point, though, is that when we're not in an aligned place in ourselves, that those abilities can be distorted. And like when we're growing up and we're trying to make sense of our realities, right? It's like we need the highest frequency expression of these abilities is like there's a conscious exchange of information. So if, like most of us, if you've been mind reading in an environment where no one's conscious and no one's validating you, you may be diving into frequencies of your shared field that nobody can really prove are real. So it's, you only know them yourself. And because of the conscious creation part of reality, it's hard to really be in integrity with yourself when you know something that's so deep that nobody in the shared field can really meet you in. And that's tricky. I know for me, as a highly intuitive being and going through my healing right now, there's so many frequencies going on in my ancestral field that are so difficult that I know I can't really bring up with my family because they don't have the emotional regulation skills to, first of all, receive the information. And second of all, the normalcy in their own realities to be able to validate what I'm telling them. They may receive what I say, but they're not always able to consciously meet me in that resonance. And that's where it gets tricky, because it's like it can often, if you're always creating with yourself, that could be another layer of narcissistic abuse you're healing, where it's like your own mind can be trying to help you build a sense of like safety and coherence, but it's not relating to the environment. So, you know, when we're healing as empaths and we're adults in recovery, we're showing that child, like, listen, there are spaces you can trust me to choose when it's time to share things and to discern what spaces can handle what information, so we can actually have connection. Because it's very subtle, yet for a lot of us who have lived with extreme disconnection, like we can be subconsciously blocking our own ability to be able to consciously create in community, which is organic, and not even know it.
Yeah, it's called self-sabotage. And I think that's like a popular topic.
Self-sabotage. Yeah.
That's just like another archetype, like the hero, the scapegoat, the black sheep of the family, and the self-saboteur, you know, but doesn't make any sense. It's not logical. It's emotional.
Yeah.
It's everything is really like all kinds of every problem you could think of in the world, every type of abusive, toxic relationship or communication interactions are all stem from trauma, unprocessed, undigested trauma. And I think if each one of us could actually look inside and see that the members of our outer external family growing up are actually still living within us, and we've internalized, because we're so open as children and trusting, we've internalized all those roles, all those players, all those family members. And that's why we are kind of reliving the past. That's why we're attracted to people that are not always very good for us, you know, in our closest, most intimate relationships, because subconsciously they remind us, you know, of our mother, of our abusive, suffocating mother, or neglectful, dismissive, cold-hearted father, whatever, you know. And they didn't have these diagnoses. They didn't go to therapy mostly, you know. They never worked on their stuff. And so, but we can work on ours because, you know, we have these amazing tools, right? So those parts of our inner family are just as important. And I mean, if we could shift the focus on our inner world and work out what's happening with that inner conflict, you know, without, like you said, demonizing or blaming, you know, the family members that just didn't know what they were doing or saying. They knew not, what is that expression? they knew not what they were saying or doing or the effect that it would have on us. They were just acting out as adults, but really as wounded children in adult bodies. So I think it's really important to do the inner work and not to be afraid of those parts of us that, haven't healed yet.
Yeah. I just want to honor too, like, if you're someone, it's because especially when you're an adult child in recovery, and you're, especially with family, because all of us, if you've got trauma, there's got to be some relationship with family. It's coming up so consistently in the channel. It's like, it's hard when you're still like in relationship with your family. I know for me right now, honoring the density of how hard it is when you're going through a healing journey and you're kind of still coming up, but you're orbiting with the frequency of people who are much lower, and then their healing journey is much slower. Like, it can be rocky. And I wanted to honor, like, how literally hard it is on your system to be able to recognize that to be normalizing a reality where you are more loving towards yourself, and having people mirror that back to you, and then going back to to a past timeline that's very dense, and having people that maybe aren't as abusive as they used to be still playing out the same essential unloving behaviors, and not getting that nourishment. I know for me, like, I've gone through a lot of healing, and it's impacted my family and inspired them to heal. Yet I've also been in an acceptance phase where it's like, these people may not be able or want to in this lifetime be at that frequency that I'm at. And there might be a lot of loving reasons for that. Yet also realizing I have to emancipate, because that's the word that keeps coming up for me, is like emancipating my energy, building my field, and honoring what is. It's not that acceptance piece. It's simple and it's sad sometimes. Like, I'm grieving even deeper.
Mm-hmm.
I'm accepting more. I'm embracing more parts of myself that haven't really been expressing themselves as often, and realizing, wow, like, my family, my dad might not really be available for,
Mm-hmm.
the kind of connection that I am, or really any connection. And it's not because he doesn't love me. It's because he's doing his best to work with the deep ingrained templating that he has. And that's hard. That's hard.
And he never had a model or a role model, or, a healthy role model or family dynamic where he could pass it on to you and he could model that for you. He never had that. So how could he give to you, or, any mother or father, or, parental figure? How could that person give to a child, something that they never had and that they can't even relate with? And it's a similar, in a way. There's also, I just wanted to bring up, like, what we do in ACA with adult children or survivors, whatever you want to call us. And that's like probably 96% of the population. But most of that group hasn't dealt with it or is in denial over it. And that's okay, because it is a question of willingness and readiness. Most of us, minimize the different subtle forms of abuse that we've experienced as normal, which is also very scary, and sometimes when we tell people what we've experienced, I'm working with an IFS therapist, and she was like, oh my God, like, what? And IFS stands for Internal Family Systems. She at one point gasped. When I saw her gasping, I realized, like, how, like, serious and how injurious. I don't know if that's the word, but like, that injury was really, that damage, that injury was deeper than I thought. I would just sort of play it off, or I didn't know, and that's the challenge too. When you're in it for so long, you kind of relate to what you're experiencing in your home, that you don't even talk about, that you hide from others. You think that that's kind of like somewhat normal in a way. At least a lot of us do. And when we tell like a neutral, safe person, this is what happened. And that takes a lot of courage too, like just what what you're modeling for us today. So thank you. When you tell somebody like on the outside who grew up in a fairly stable, emotionally stable household, right? With parents or caregivers who were present for us and emotionally available for us and encouraged us and nurtured us and saw and heard us, and were always there for us to back us and support us, right? When somebody like that hears this, like it really hits home. At least it hit home for me in that moment, like, oh my goodness, I didn't really think it was like that big of a deal. And that's what we do. We minimize the pain and the hurt and the shock that affected our nervous system that we still carry in every cell of our body. And we tend to minimize it and say like, and the reason we do that is so we can survive, and we can continue like living and hopefully thriving. So I just wanted to bring that in also. A lot of us don't even realize we're still in denial about lots of stuff. And the most subtle form of abuse, I think, is emotional. Is not physical. They're all horrible, and there's not one that's worse than another. But sometimes we don't realize it if we're not actually physically abused. And it's emotional, it's psychological, that could really run even deeper, right? So what do you think about all that? What I've just said?
I'm feeling a lot. For me, I just want to say, like, we have so much power in reality. And what I mean by reality is like when we look at things and we let ourselves be with things as they are, the pain, the shock, all of it, it feels like the most disempowering place when we're in it. Yet that's where like everything transforms. And I know for me, like you said, like the minimizing, like we do, it's our left brain's way of protecting our nervous system when there's an influx of emotional energy that we can't reframe, not that we can't handle, that we're not, how am I going to say this, that we're feeling that we know no one else is feeling with us in that group, but we're feeling it. When you're in a family full of people who are emotionally unavailable and you start getting real, that influx of energy, of light, that is so overwhelming to our system. It's like, and in a healthy community, organic community, we can share that energy and leverage it together. For those of us who are recovering adult children, who are discovering ourselves, we were used to environments that when you were real, you were alone in that reality and that high and low frequency. That wilderness was life or death. Even like basic emotions felt like dying because you didn't have anyone to mirror back co-regulation. So, for those of us who are on this call, who are deep in healing, and we're being flooded and we're recognizing we're trying to manage our energy and we're having extreme highs and lows, and our bodies are like short circuiting because we're having literally like, it feels like you're on a roller coaster ride all the time and you're not even in a fucking amusement park, excuse my language. Right. It's like, I just want to honor you.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I want to honor you. But that's where your power is. Because for those of us who are living in narcissistic realities, they're not living in reality. They're not living in what's real. So when you're going through the healing journey, it's not glamorous, but feeling all that pain.
No, it's not. It's not fun, but it's worth it.
It's worth it in the end. And I'm at a place in my journey where it's finally starting to like, I am feeling like there's a little bit of a place where I don't always have to feel so intense, but it's been about like 30 years of grieving beyond death, like grieving beyond human comprehension, beyond what I was taught. Like, and it was hard. And I really want to honor all of us who are like in recovery and being like, so how do I get these emotions? And the simple answer is you got to be willing to put your toes in the water. If it's still too cold, you got to practice really just dipping and dipping and dipping until you can finally just wade. Because it's like, that's what everyone in your family has been avoiding up until now is reality. And I know it's hard, yet there is a life I'm getting so emotional. There is a life after all this sadness. There is life happening. And, it doesn't,
Yes.
you don't have to rush it. You're already here. Just keep pressing in it. Keep gently. There's no rush to get it done. Ask for help, find the community, and just gently practice your nervous system on it. So you can kind of get used to because the flooding will happen, especially as your family makes huge shifts. Like my family's making huge shifts, huge quantum packets of basically demons. Like there's been like beings in our field that have been feeding off that lack of presence coming up, and they have to be I'm not going to be cleared out. They got to get cleared out, and it's scary. Some of the stuff I'm seeing in my line is
Why don't
scary.
we do that now? Why don't we talked about aura clans? Why don't we do that right now? Before we end the call.
Oh, yes, right.
And this hour is just flying by.
It flew by.
But I'd love to do that. And just for a couple of minutes to really ground in our own power, to actually accept and allow our powerful lights to flicker and shine, to shimmer and shine, right? But to unzip any armor, any barriers, any blocks around us. So let's just breathe into the inner part of us. So our centers. Imagine that there's a zipper, and then you could just unzip yourself from all that heavy, dense debris and that really difficult family energy that you've been exposed to. And imagine there's a golden comb, and it's made of golden light. And just take that comb and just comb your aura with it, from above your head to the tips of your toes, and really move it like you're scanning yourself, right? You're scanning your body with this golden, healing, warm, soothing and nurturing feeling. And breathe into any sensations that are coming up. So breathe in the light that's being emitted from this golden comb. It's just radiating all around, radiating toward you and transmitting its light, its hope, its this frequency of self-acceptance, and that you've been on a journey and it's okay. So you're just going to comb down the front and back of you, the sides of you, left and right, above and below you, in every direction. You're just going to comb down, smooth out your meridians, chakras, nadis. You're just going to brush yourself off of all of that sort of all of that earth dust, all of the memories and the energies that are still maybe clinging and corded to you, and just shake off and flick off at the end of each sweeping motion as you pass this golden comb over and down and through you. Just flick it off, imagining or visualizing. Use your power of creative visualization, seeing all those sort of dense and heavy, lower vibrational energies kind of being, and see if you can unburden yourself further by imagining that there's a violet flame in front of you, and you can just unburden yourself and pull those strands of fight, of flight, of fear, of just all those frozen parts of you, and warm them up by this violet flame or this fire pit, right? And just ask the consciousness of this fire energy, this fire element, to just transmute everything for you. So just keep pulling out those strands of pain, of fear, of shame, of shock, of whatever it is that you've pulled in that's still dysregulating your nervous system, and just keep tossing it until you feel unburdened, releasing all the energies that never belonged to you in the first place. All the energies which are exhausting, of trying to fit in with your family, get approval, people please, and all of those sort of diseases that you're still addicted to. So imagine that all those cords are unlooping and unraveling, all the knots are disentangling, and breathe into every cell of your body now, breathing in that violet flame and breathing back the parts of you left there, right? That are still frozen in some other timeline. And have your own loving parent, right? Connect with your own loving parent and ask and tell that inner child or the teenager or those younger parts of you, you don't have to stay in that scene and keep repeating and recreating the stress, the struggle, the trauma, right? And ask that part of you where he or she would like to go now, and take them to a safe place, to a safe shelter or a refuge where they'll always be safe, right? And free and liberated, sovereign of all of the suffering that they endured, that they were exposed to. And just take back all the parts of you that you left there in those scenes, right? Take them back, reclaim them, unfreeze them, and hold and embrace all of the feelings that come up for you now. And then just breathe in and imagine that you're in the center of a beautiful turquoise colored whirlpool of water energy that's just creating more flow, more space for you to just breathe and just be, not in the past, not in the future. And imagine that whirlpool of watery, divine feminine energy just picking up speed and carrying away in the spiraling motion any remaining traces of energy that you absorbed, that you took on as a psychic empath. And just see it all flowing and rushing out to this beautiful scene in nature, maybe this universal ocean, allowing yourself to become oceanic, and just everything is released. You're unburdening, you're unloading all the pain and shame you've been carrying because you thought you had to. And now locate on your body any holes, rips, or tears around your aura, around your field, and just stretch out into this big bubble or this golden sphere or an orb or a cosmic egg that's unbreakable, unshatterable. And imagine what that feels like, that it's protecting you. You're in your own safety net. And I really feel your feet now grounding on the earth. Fully support it. And see that all of the holes, rips, and tears are mending themselves with this the same golden light that reflected off of that golden comb. And just breathe in that golden light and let it fill up all those cracks and crevices. And let that light into your broken heart. And let everything start mending, repairing, and sealing. So you're not leaking your precious life force energy. Taking back everything that belongs to you, that's yours, your birthright of peace, presence, and power. And now connecting with that part of you, your higher power. And asking if it has a message for you. What would it like you to know now? How can you develop a closer connection and relationship to your own higher power? Your inner protector. So take 3 more breaths to just kind of ground back and recollect any any parts of yourself that you can see now right in front of you that always have belonged to you, and see if you can inhale them and allow your gifts, your strengths, your resilience, your truth, your voice, becoming your own advocate and healing your ancestors too. And then place your hands over your heart, or one hand over your heart, the other over your solar plexus, and just breathe. And exhale longer. It's okay to sit with uncomfortable feelings until they pass. So let them out and hold them. Don't run away from them. And thank yourself for taking this little journey today, this mini journey. Thank you.
Isn't she awesome, you guys? Oh my God, all the people watching and like listening, like, oh, Vandana is such a facilitator of these meditations and activations. I feel so clear and so grateful and so crystalline.
I'm so grateful that you were able to receive this, because not everyone is at that stage of recovery. So
you did really good.
I just wanted to thank you again. Would you like to share, Zach, anything else, any other pearls or jewels of wisdom? And also, how can people find you? I know you also wrote an amazing ebook that I can't wait to read myself.
Thank you. Okay. It takes baby steps. You know, for those of us who have extreme issues with community and we're really not trusting, like it's about this idea of building confidence with yourself first. And these leaps of faith do not have to be off a building. Okay, you guys, it can be small. You can build small. Okay, they're just as precious and just as valuable as like a big jump. And you can find me on my website if you're interested. It's Zachary Michael Z.com. We'll plug it into the little bio. And I do have an ebook that I channeled last year called Empathy, the Key to Your Personal Stargate. It's just a cute little channeled like journey into my world as an empath, with a little bit of activation here and there about what it means to be an empath and healing, stepping into a new frequency of leadership in your life. And I'm so grateful to be here with Vandana and you, and to feel you all in the field with us. This is what being in community is all about, at different frequencies, like feeling each other in the field, even when we're not physically able to relate to logically. And I really would love to meet you guys in all kinds of ways, not just non-physical. And I cannot wait for the days when you guys start popping out of our field to work with us, to connect with us, to hang with us, because we love you and we're excited to build that trust with you and to do it together.
Aw, I'm gonna cry now. You're so sweet. Oh my goodness. So thank you, Zachary. Thank you so much. You're definitely my spiritual brother. From another mother.
Sister, guys. Vandana's my sister, my goddess, darling. I worship her embodiment.
Oh,
and in doing so, I get to receive it
that.
too. I love it too. We receive together. We're embodying the energies. Yes. Like what?
All right. So I just wanted to say thank you. I'm so deeply grateful for this conversation. It was so healing on so many levels, but I feel like my soul is just like out of turmoil now. I feel like a lot of the main malady I think that we're all experiencing is not just physical, mental, emotional, psychological, spiritual trauma, disconnection, separation, loss of our childhoods, but it's soul trauma. And this is something that can take a while to heal, but I want to encourage everyone not to give up. Please send me an email if you're struggling or Zach, if that's okay. If,
Yes.
you just like don't know what to do next. If you've hit that bump in the road where it feels like your life is totally unmanageable,
Yes,
that you're
relatable up in there.
dysfunctional because you grew up in a dysfunctional home. Because I want to just say, like, finding your community or a safe enough person. It doesn't have to be, a licensed therapist. It could be a trusted friend, a spiritual sangha, sister or brother. It could be a counselor, it could be a coach, anyone just who is willing to listen and hold space for you, and not necessarily even provide feedback, right? But just to hold that space, just to hold you. I know that, just real quick, I'm being told to share a memory I had years ago. I had a very close friend who also experienced a lot of childhood abuse. And unfortunately, I had to practice safe boundaries, or fortunately, and end the relationship, because it became very toxic, where I felt like he was acting out with me because he knew he could. And so, but what I want to bring up in this scenario, this memory, there was another person there, and we were going to have a drumming circle. We're just hanging out in this person's apartment. And I received some news that shocked and dysregulated my nervous system, because I was deeply involved with someone who I was working with, but also led me to believe that there was something romantic too. And then when I found out that that wasn't really the case, or he was seeing someone else, I just burst out in tears. And so the first person, who was actually my closer friend for many years, but also couldn't be fully present in the way I needed him to be because of his own trauma that wasn't fully processed, or even a little processed probably at that point, maybe now. So there was that person saying to me, oh, but, it was not intentional, but I felt like my feelings were not validated. They were being invalidated, because he was basically, and being dismissed, like basically telling me this person is, blah, blah, blah. And he's not worth you getting so upset. And he's like this and he's like that. And that wasn't helping. It was not helping. It actually fed that looping system. And I couldn't breathe through it. I couldn't break free of that, that negative feedback looping system. But the other person held a different space, and he didn't say anything. He just held me. He just hugged me. He just held me, and I sobbed all over his clothing, tears of appreciation, because I just felt so honored. I felt so appreciated, and it was just unconditional. He didn't try to talk me out of my feelings. He just listened to me, and that was the most healing experience for me, and I'll never forget it. And I just want to share, when you belong to a community, it doesn't have to be like an official, adult child, like the ACA group that I was telling you about. But if you want to know more, I'm happy to share the links with you. There are meetings all over the world. But, even if it's just like a few friends, or some type of support system, or a Reiki healing circle, whatever it is, like, try to get out. And if you can't, you have Zoom. That's the beauty of the Zoom technology. I have my meetings on Zoom. So I just want to share, like, we're not made to grieve alone. We're not supposed to. Evolutionary speaking, like speaking in terms of evolution, we have these families, these packs, these tribes that we come from. And if one of us got thrown off or thrown out of our tribe, we could die. And that's what it can feel like, if we try to do this all on our own, try to survive on our own. So we need each other. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Welcome. Oh, thank you for sharing that.
And yeah. I just wanted to share my website, vandanalightshealing.com.
Yes.
I have over 200 recordings of inner child transmissions, attunement, empowerment attunements, and also in utero womb healing, where we tend to pick up our birth mothers' fear, doubt, stress, worry, anxiety, and everything goes right through the placenta walls as we're developing, right? And the first organ to develop is our heart and brain. So think about that for a minute. We need to go all the way back. We don't need to relive it, but we could reframe it, we can repattern it, and there are ways to change how we feel about ourselves, each other, and the universe. So we're all connected, like we're interbeings, like Thich Nhat Hanh says. So it doesn't mean it's like over. Like if you had a rough childhood, I feel for you, because I did too. So did Zach. But it doesn't mean that that's the end. There is a new beginning. There is hope. But find a way to come out of denial about it, without making anyone wrong or bad or evil or vicious. And take a blameless inventory and see where you're at and see what happened and write it down, journal about it. And then find community. So I look forward to meeting with you again in community next time. Yes. And I think it's going to be scheduled for 2 weeks, but we have some other exciting projects in the works. And I think definitely, Zach, you're it. You're going to be a part of it. So I love working with you. It doesn't feel like work. I mean,
it doesn't at all.
I love playing with you. I love playing.
I know, it's so fun.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Zach. So I'll see you next time. And please share out this recording with everyone that you think may need it.
Yes.
So you never know. Because a lot of times, I think that the trauma that we've been through can turn out to be like it just, we keep it to ourselves because we're so ashamed to talk about it, and we mask. So I want you to know that it's safe to unmask now and just be yourself, tell your story, and that by doing that, you'll be helping thousands and thousands of other people. You'll be giving them permission to tell their story too, but not become your story. Thank you. Yeah. And so, love and kisses to everyone. Love you so much. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you next time.
You're welcome. Love you. Bye-bye.